Thank you for coming here and enlightening us. I quickly scanned the book, and it seems to be highly readable, the style. So I look forward to reading that.
Yeah.
My questions are, one, have you had the opportunity to look into the past on student agitations? For example, I remember in 1989, Mandal agitation, anti-reservation was there, where even self-immolations were taking place. The second question is regarding your own book, from germination of the idea to the publishing the book. How much time did you take?
Yes, that the Mandal part is referred to in the book. But I looked at the Mandal, when I say Mandal agitations, it did not focus on the anti-Mandal agitations per se, because the concerns, which were raised by the anti-Mandal agitations were very diverse, that, they are going to take our jobs. But that was mass hysteria, which was created, is what I feel. Just like, mass hysteria is being created right now, that, these Muslims, these Christians, these scheduled caste people are going to take Hindu jobs, so we have to defend this nation. I think that Mandal almost parallels to what is happening. Anti-Mandal agitations almost parallels to what's happening right now. So I looked at Mandal agitations in a particular way, that after Mandal, I looked at the composition of universities in different parts of the country. So because of implementation of the Mandal Commission recommendations, the composition of the university started changing, and I think that it is because of that I wouldn't say it is really because of that, because there are other contributing factors as well, because our country has progressed economically. But Mandal has definitely played an important, Mandal Commission recommendations have definitely played a very important role in changing the composition of students and faculty members in university spaces, thereby changing the kind of student leaders we get in university spaces. See, we couldn't have thought of somebody like Rohit Vemula at one point of time. That might sound like a very generic statement. I'm not saying that there were no leaders earlier, but in a campus, to think that somebody like Rohit, would be recognized as a student leader, it was very difficult at one point of time. And for an example, when I said, in journalistic circles, I said that this Rohit, he wrote this particular suicide note, and nobody is actually looking at what he wrote before that. And so somebody, a very senior journalist, told me that, see, apparently he studied in a particular campus in Hyderabad, and he very casually referred, he very casually said that a lot of students, Dalit students, or scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and OBC students in his class at that point of time used to drop out by the first or the second semester. So because I studied in a university, very recently, relatively recently, I told him that there are, some of these students who could have been your batchmates are currently faculty members in, universities teaching economics, political science, and God knows what all. So that change is brought about by Mandal. Definitely, one of the contributing factors is Mandal, and I have mentioned that in the book. And the second part is, how long did I take so my reporting experience of 8 to 9 years did figure in the book, but for the book alone, I think that I took around 2 years to finish it.
This is something which I have actually wondered about very often, and though I was a student a long time ago, which is, you have student protests about everything, including, at least on JNU, about international issues, Israel, Palestine, to nuclear bombs, to, everything. But how is it that none of these protests seem to be about education? It's about reservations, it's about this, that, and this is completely caste neutral. whether it's upper caste, lower caste, religion neutral. How is it that students are not protesting about, but over a period of time, I think people have realized, and no, the signs are there, and this is in your book as well, that hundreds of engineering colleges close down. Some will be converted into liberal arts colleges because that's going to be the new fad. Other engineering colleges and management institutions come up. And for students, and certainly the parents who are often making those decisions on behalf of their children, you surely know that these colleges are not going to provide the kind of education that you need to get to be in order to be employed. But why is nobody protesting about education?
Yes, that's true. But it's not that such protests did not happen at all, because Occupy UGC protest was basically about education, and even I would think that FTII protests, they said that you cannot introduce someone into a campus which is teaching films without even checking the credentials. That meant that the FTII students were asking for accountability from the government, as far as appointments were concerned, and I think that they were addressing the policy, the government policy at that point of time. Another thing, I think that such agitations, while these agitations were there, or protests were there, they did not reach the scale of that of Rohit, anti-caste agitations, or such similar agitations. Also because this used to be my saying, this is what I believe, I've been believing for quite a long time, that if the engineering college students, across the country start protesting one fine day saying that we have a problem with this system, I think that the education as a concept and an institution in India is going to crumble, because their strength is quite huge. But the problem is that they live in campuses where any organization of student activities on any sort of political lines is not allowed, encouraged at all. So I think that it's from the engineering segment, it is, or the management.
And some say that's a good thing.
Yes, some say that that's a good thing, but as history would tell us, if you do not equip your children to fight injustice in the world, or whatever is being doled out to them, I think that you are making them really docile people who will only receive, who will always be at the receiving end of things. This is similar to, when people say, this is the example which I usually give, that you say that, do not tell students to agitate, or tell them not to participate in politics. This is almost like telling a 15 or 16-year-old girl not to learn self-defense. If somebody attacks you, if somebody violates you, you have to fight back, and you need to know how to fight back. And this might sound like a very far-fetched example, but it is true that educational institutions in the country, or young people in villages in this country, in places like Kashmir, in places like Chhattisgarh, are facing violations of different kinds. And if you do not equip them, if you do not encourage them to fight, are you asking the young youth in the country, I think that, are you asking the youth in the country to take it without having, without even raising a voice? Is that what this country wants its young to learn in these educational institutions?
Let's say not fight, but at least question what is being handed out, whether in the classroom, whether in terms of politics, whether in terms of everything. As young people, I think it is. And even now, as a grown-up person,
Right.
I think it is sort of incumbent upon us to not take anything that is given out to us.
Exactly.
to reason with it.
Right.
If X or Y or Z is something that is done that the government or an institution demands, there has to be something rational behind it. It has
Right.
to make sense. So at the very least, let's forget fighting for or agitation. But I think the spirit of questioning is is something which is suppressed. It happens in schools, and people who work on our schooling say that. I have been associated with a couple of academic institutions as a faculty member in India, and that spirit of questioning is simply it's not encouraged. And I think that's the worst part of it. I wouldn't go so far as having to necessarily agitate or fight, but at least question.
Yeah, to question, I think that it's a give and take. The culture of, encouraging students to question comes from a culture of, an academic culture where open discussions can happen. So I think that, in some campuses where I have seen, for instance, in Jadavpur University, I was there. So students in, seminars would stand up and ask faculty members, by interrupting them. So I thought, I felt that, this is not the kind of discipline which usually happens in other places. So, but anyway, this seems fun. So, but that sort of, here we are not living in a Gurukul or something like that, where, Guru has to be, honored and you have to fall at his feet or something like that, which, by the way, happens in some institutions. This is... I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that it's very interesting. So,
I'm sorry, I'll interrupt. The thing is, what we have made of our colleges and universities, I think, how can you possibly respect many of our teachers when they have been appointed to their positions not on the basis of merit? It's widespread. The kind of problems that you see in our higher education sector in terms of quality, in terms of even basic teaching. Forget research, forget other things, because these are going to be done mostly at elite institutions, right? The education system has been reduced to, it's in terrible shape. So if we expect students who may be, let's say, less informed, politically engaged, not engaged, but how can they trust their teachers when they know that, and these things, they do not remain concealed. Everybody knows, this guy has been appointed because of this reason, that person has been appointed because of this reason, and so on. And our institutions have followed that path at least since the very beginning, but it has become worse. Some attribute it to, let's say in Bihar and UP to Lalu Yadav and his kind of politics. Others to the pro-Mandal agitation period. But the fact is that even our best institutions have been completely contaminated in terms of things like faculty hiring and so on. Right? In that case, how do you expect meritorious students, people who have worked hard to get to an IIT, to get to a central university or to one of the better colleges, to be in a classroom and take everything lying down, even even if it is at a very low cost. The kind of tuition fees, etc. we have. For good or bad, but you don't expect people to be to follow that Gurukul system when the Guru is not deserving of that kind of respect, right? I'm not saying it's universally the case, but what I'm saying is, that could be the reason why you should have actually more questions.
Actually, in response to what Dr. Pushkar said, I think it happens at varied levels where, if I'm a student and I'm upset about something, then I will first go to my teacher to see the person who I trust, to see what she has to say about it and, who's with me on this. And then if I'm dampened at that stage only and told, keep quiet, I'll probably take her advice and keep quiet. The next person I move to is the principal. But if the principal also tells me, just hush it up, don't put it in writing, just let's deal with this kind of thing. And this is what is happening everywhere, including in a small college, including in the university, including in many other places. So I think at various levels. My question was, did you explore any of the unrest that youth are having on social networking sites where they bring up these issues, many people agree with them, then they pass it on to other people, and a lot of agitation, sometimes true and sometimes with false beliefs and false facts, like a lot of the political stuff that we're hearing today, we don't know half of what of it is true, because many young people are getting together and sometimes bringing up facts which they are paid to bring up by a political party on a social networking site, and then everyone starts to believe it. And then to find out the real truth and go against it is really difficult. So on the social networking sphere, there are people making opinions which are moving the country even in elections today.
True.
which we see in the results, and then we say, oh, something is wrong with the ballot, but something is happening in a sphere which we can't see and we can't count tangibly.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Actually, there are two characters in my book. One is, they're diametrically opposite. So one, is a student in Manipur, who's sitting around with his friends, and he tries to find, the student is in Kohima, Nagaland, and he is a Naga student who tries to network with Naga students in Manipur using social networking sites. So he tries to find out, what agitations are happening here, there, there's coordination, phone ringing, chatting 24/7, this, that, and all that. Then I did speak to another person, who actually worked as, I wouldn't say worked, because he did not tell me how much he was paid for it, but he was very agitated about a lot of these false information which is false, floating around and all that. So he wanted to give out real information and all that. So he was what you can broadly categorize as a troll. A social media troll. So he, his background was very interesting, because he was a student, he was a young person, who was quite good at his studies. Then in between, he tried to work in a call center. That did not work out. Then he took admission in an evening college. That also did not work out. And then finally, wherever he is right now, I do not want to reveal too much of it, but wherever he works, he started finding, so throughout his journey, he started finding all these points, where he would tell himself and make himself believe that there is some big conspiracy, which is happening outside, which he has to resist. So this was the most willing troll I had ever, seen, who was in it to really change the system. And he was trying to change the system by trolling people like, like perhaps if you're a student, he could actually start trolling you, calling you all sorts of names, because he is really under the impression that he is trying to change the world. So yes, social media that way is very polemic, yeah.
Hi, thank you for your book. I hope we get to read lots more.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you could share some sort of patterns you see of the mood of students, because you've met so many different, culturally diverse students. So if you could share some more of the spirit that they are holding right now. What's it like?
I think that there is there are a lot of factors which constitute this mood. I think there is despair. There is despair. There is also hope. There is some amount of what do you call? I can't really clearly pinpoint it. Like it depends on, like when I start. It depends on, from time to time it actually changes. But one factor which I noticed was that everybody whom I came across wants some sort of change or the other, and they are striving towards it. But how they go about doing it is very poignant, I would say, because like in a campus like HCU, University of Hyderabad, the students started with such gusto that there were reporters who would come there and say that is the revolution going to come tomorrow? Because that was the spirit. So now that almost the administration has removed almost every trace of that agitation from that campus, so there is despair. So people at that point of time who did not submit their PhDs because they were shouting slogans, they would feel it even more that nothing actually happened. So that's why I said that there was hope and despair. But I think ultimately a lot of people, students whom I met, are really fed up of fighting these battles, and I think that all of us collectively should give them a break and help them in some way.
I just want to quickly interrupt. No, there's a very influential idea that education leads to an improvement in one's life chances. I mean, it's a mantra which every international organization preaches. It's a mantra which everyone chants, and that's the reason why we try to do our best to get our children educated, the right kind of education and the right kind of job and all this. The evidence is actually mixed. I mean, because that narrative is it holds only where we are really talking about education which actually educates in that sense. I mean, it gives people the skills which are necessary to actually get jobs. But also because of technology, even if you are educated in the right way, the problem is that with the kinds of changes that are taking place, you might find yourself unemployed simply because things have changed along the way over the next 5 years. I read somewhere that some major company, I think Amazon, is having to retrain its own workers because over the past 5 years things have changed so much, and these workers have to reorient themselves. But if you stay with that education changes, improves one's life chances. In India, given the quality of education, they were given the kinds of stress or difficult conditions under which students have to study. I mean, it's all right to say that with hard work and with one's efforts, etc., you'll succeed. And of course, there are success stories, but it doesn't always work out that way. I mean, for most people, hard work doesn't necessarily mean good outcomes. But the question is this: if education is not improving one's life chances, if at the end of a college degree, an engineering degree, a management degree, for which you have, in some cases, you have spent a lot of money because you do not have sufficient number of public institutions, and therefore you have to send your kids to private institutions, and you find yourself unemployed or with a job that pays 10, 15, 20,000 rupees after having spent a few lakhs for education. So the outcome is you are either unemployed or underemployed, or in many cases, you're unemployed and simply waiting for something to happen. The anthropologist Craig Jeffrey, and I mentioned his name earlier, talked about students in Meerut doing time pass. Time pass where you could spend a time watching the World Cup or tennis or something else or whatever else is going on. Now, time pass sounds benign. I mean, it means nothing much. I mean, people just passing time. But put that in the context of where the life chances in terms of employment, proper employment, which is consistent with the kind of degree you have, that is something that does not turn into a reality. And the dreamers part is one part of the story, one small segment of it. There's going to be frustration. And other ways, given the kind of fractures our society has, that there are not enough jobs, that the lower castes are taking away our jobs, that community is taking away our jobs. Another influential thesis which has emerged is that education, in fact, can lead to more conflict. So in education, rather than having a positive impact on society, can actually destabilize societies, and especially multi-ethnic or diverse societies like India. I mean, I'm not saying that it is already happening in India, but you see signs of that, social unrest, whether it is, and when Hyderabad, let's accept that Hyderabad or JNU, these are elite campuses. I mean, these are, the best universities in the country, 1 and 2, I think, in terms of central universities, right? But did you get a sense that despite education, things might get out of hand if the employment scenario does not improve, if the larger political discourse, rather than being unifying, remains divisive?
That's something which I looked at in my book as well. I call them the green rooms of an impending revolt. So that's basically about, see, we have an unemployment rate of 7.2% right now. A lot of students who pass out of these campuses do not, any of the educational institutions, they need not necessarily land a job. So the most Yeah, I think what's worse is that they land these jobs which they do not want to do, because if I think that any of you would experience this. If you have Swiggy here, just the next time a Swiggy delivery person comes to your doorstep, just ask what that person's educational qualification is. Most of them would be graduates. A lot of them would have completed their +2 and would and these are not temporary jobs like in the West, where you'd take a summer off and then work and then come back to education. These are people who are trying to be delivery executives after doing their graduation. Similar is the case with cab drivers. You get into any cab, and I met a lot of students, young people who are BTechs, after passing out of MBA, driving a cab under the cab aggregator Uber or Ola. So here, I think that such people, who do not get the jobs which they think they deserve, they are they're going to be a real, issue in our country. So even when the union government or any of the state governments say that we have created so many jobs, what as journalists and writers we should ask them, and that's what I have tried to do, is that what kind of jobs are you talking about? Because if, as you said, if the education doesn't give you the results which you want, then why educate yourself at all? Because if we are trying to create an unskilled workforce out of skilled people, then I think that there, at that very level, this whole Skill India program kind of loses meaning. So these are questions which any writer or any journalist or actually any citizen could ask anybody. Yeah.